The moment Lester Holt delivered the question that froze Jasmine Crockett in her tracks, the nation held its breath. His voice carried the kind of weight that silences even the noisiest room, cutting through the chatter, the camera clicks, the restless energy of a divided country glued to their screens. "Congresswoman Crockett," Holt began, his words deliberate, measured, almost surgical. "There are whispers of deals made in back rooms, promises traded for power. Tonight, before the American people, will you finally tell the truth about what really happened?" It wasn't the question alone. It was the way he asked it, calm, unshaken, like a man who already knew the answer but wanted the world to hear her say it. Jasmine Crockett leaned back, arms crossed, a smirk curling at the corner of her mouth. That smile carried the arrogance of someone who thought she'd already won. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every twitch of confidence on her face. She had been here before, weathered storms, out-talked reporters, brushed off critics with the ease of a seasoned player. But tonight was different. The crowd sensed it. The silence wasn't ordinary, it was loaded, thick, the kind that comes before lightning splits the sky. Millions watching at home leaned closer to their screens. Something big was coming and everyone could feel it. Crockett finally leaned toward the microphone, ready to dismiss Holt's question like swatting away a pesky gnat. But there was something in her eyes, just for a split second, a flicker of uncertainty. It passed quickly. Too quickly. "Lester," she said smoothly, voice dripping with practiced charm, "I think the American people care more about real issues than conspiracy theories dreamed up by ratings-hungry journalists." Gasps rippled through the audience. It wasn't just defiance. It was mockery, direct, brazen, a shot fired at the man who had spent decades becoming the most trusted voice in American news. On social media, clips of her smirk and that one line began to explode within seconds. Hashtags formed. Comment sections erupted. But what she said next would ignite a firestorm across the country. Understand why this debate mattered, you had to rewind just a few months. Election year tension crackled through the country like dry leaves before a wildfire. Poll numbers swung wildly with every headline. Corruption scandals clung to the Capitol like a fog no one could escape. Americans were tired of politicians who made promises and broke them, tired of hearing about secret deals and disappearing accountability. This wasn't just another debate. It was a boiling point. At the center of it all stood Lester Holt. Decades of reporting had forged his reputation into something unshakable. To many, he wasn't just a journalist, he was the country's conscience with a microphone. Presidents, senators, CEOs, they all sat across from him eventually, knowing one thing. He didn't flinch, he didn't play favorites, he asked the questions no one wanted to answer. Tonight was supposed to be no different, but Jasmine Crockett didn't see it that way. To her, this was all theater, another stage, another crowd, another opportunity to remind the world she was untouchable. Behind the scenes, staffers whispered about donations that had mysteriously vanished, campaign promises that bent under pressure, alliances with lobbyists that no one could quite explain. And yet, she strolled into the debate hall as if none of it could ever stick. "They can't touch me," she'd told a reporter backstage, smirking like she was in on a joke the rest of the country didn't get. "They've been trying for years." It wasn't arrogance alone. It was defiance, the kind that comes when someone believes the system works for them, never against them. Lester knew all this. He'd read the same reports, talked to the same insiders. He'd built the opening question to pierce through that shield of confidence to see if there was even a crack hiding underneath. And America was watching, desperate for a crack. Because this debate wasn't just about Crockett. It was about whether anyone in power could be held accountable anymore, or if the game was rigged for good. The cameras cut between Holt's calm, steady eyes and Crockett's easy grin. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the tension rising like a storm building miles offshore. What no one knew, not the audience, not Crockett, not even Holt himself, was that the moment of reckoning was closer than anyone realized. Before the bright lights of tonight's debate, Jasmine Crockett had already built a reputation that stretched far beyond her district lines. To her supporters, she was a rising star, bold, fearless, unwilling to bow to the old political order. But behind the polished speeches and carefully curated image, a different story had taken root, whispered through the halls of Washington and splashed across the darker corners of political blogs. A story of ambition so sharp it cut anyone who stood in her way. Her rise had been swift, almost unnaturally so. Within just a few years, Crockett had climbed from local councilwoman to national figure, her name a fixture on Sunday morning talk shows and the front page of political magazines. She spoke with fire about equality, justice, and the need to shatter ceilings, words that played well with voters hungry for change. But as her power grew, so did the questions. Whispers about campaign donors whose names conveniently disappeared from public records. A bill pushed through committee after a private meeting with an energy lobbyist who later funded her political action committee. An aide, once fiercely loyal, who resigned abruptly, citing ethical disagreements before vanishing from public view. And then there were the interviews. Clips lived online of journalists trying, again and again, to corner her on specific allegations. "Congresswoman," one anchor had asked months earlier, "how do you respond to critics who say your campaign benefited from corporate donors tied to—" Crockett had smiled mid-question, raising a hand with casual dismissal. "People care about results, not rumors," she interrupted smoothly, pivoting into a rehearsed line about economic growth. It happened over and over. A question about missing funds turned into a speech about infrastructure. Concerns about a lobbyist? Ties dissolved into vague platitudes about bipartisanship. She was slippery, impossible to pin down, the political equivalent of smoke in a closed room, and critics noticed. Op-eds accused her of dodging accountability with the skill of a seasoned illusionist. But Crockett didn't flinch. If anything, the criticism seemed to feed her confidence. "They attack because they're scared," she told a friendly podcast host at the height of one controversy. "When you're changing the system fights back." It was a line that rallied her base. Every allegation, every headline became proof, at least to her supporters, that she was over the target. But behind the swagger, colleagues saw something else: calculation. Crockett didn't just survive scandals. She seemed to anticipate them, spinning narratives before her opponents even launched theirs. Staffers described her as always 3 steps ahead, a chess player in a room full of checker pieces, and yet there was a cost to all that confidence. The longer she played untouchable, the more her critics sharpened their knives. In private circles, rivals began compiling timelines, connecting dots, building cases, not necessarily for court, but for the court of public opinion. Journalists whispered about documents that hadn't yet seen daylight. Political insiders hinted at alliances ready to crumble under the right kind of pressure. But Crockett never blinked. When a national magazine profiled her under the headline "The Untouchable," she reposted it herself with a wink emoji as though daring anyone to try. "She thinks she's invincible," one veteran lawmaker told a reporter off the record, "but power built on arrogance can crumble in seconds." And tonight, under the blinding lights of a national debate stage, that moment was inching closer with every passing second. Long before Lester Holt became the face of American journalism, before his name was synonymous with trust and accountability, there was a young man in a small Midwestern town, hunched over a battered second-hand typewriter, trying to write the world into something he could understand. He didn't come from wealth or privilege. His parents worked long hours, taught him the value of honesty and hard work, and kept the radio on during dinner because the evening news wasn't just information, it was connection. It was how ordinary people felt, less alone in a big, complicated country. As a teenager, Lester didn't dream of celebrity or power. He dreamed of truth. He watched how a single story could change lives, how reporting on factory layoffs rallied a community to demand answers, how exposing a corrupt councilman forced a resignation and gave taxpayers hope. Those early lessons burned into him the idea that journalism wasn't about ambition. It was about service. He got his first job at a local radio station, working nights no one else wanted. The pay barely covered rent, but he stayed late after. His shift, practicing his delivery on old equipment, rewriting news briefs until every word felt sharp enough to cut through noise. Veteran reporters would sometimes wander in, amused by the kid who never seemed to leave, and offer advice. "Never get too close to power," one grizzled anchor told him over burnt coffee at 2 a.m. Their job is to protect themselves. Yours is to protect the truth. It was the kind of mentorship that didn't come with fanfare or speeches, just small lessons dropped like breadcrumbs during long nights when the newsroom buzzed with deadlines and cigarette smoke. Years passed. He moved to bigger cities, bigger stations. Each time, he carried the same principles with him. When producers pushed for sensationalism, he pushed back. When executives hinted at softening questions for political guests, he refused. Viewers noticed. Slowly, almost reluctantly, America began to trust him. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He didn't chase the spotlight. It just seemed to follow him because he never compromised. By the time he landed in the anchor chair, on national television, Lester Holt had built something rare, credibility in an era drowning in cynicism. He had covered wars, elections, disasters, always calm, always steady, like a lighthouse in the storm. But what made people love him wasn't just his reporting. It was the way he carried himself. When he interviewed grieving parents after a tragedy, he listened more than he spoke. When he grilled a senator over corruption, he did it with dignity, never cruelty. He represented, to millions watching at home, the kind of America they still wanted to believe in, an America where facts mattered, where decency mattered, where truth could stand taller than politics. Colleagues told stories about the nights he stayed in the newsroom long after the cameras shut off, making calls, confirming details, refusing to go on air until he was certain he had it right. "People need to trust us," he once told a young producer. "If they lose that, we have nothing." And so, Lester Holt became more than a journalist. He became a symbol, a reminder that even in a world of spin and sound bites, there were still men who wouldn't sell out, who wouldn't bend just to keep their seat at the table. But symbols come with expectations. Every time he walked onto a debate stage, the public didn't just want questions. They wanted accountability. They wanted someone brave enough to speak for them when politicians grew slippery. They wanted someone calm enough to cut through shouting matches and dig for the truth buried underneath. And tonight, as he adjusted his tie under the blinding studio lights, Lester knew those expectations were heavier than ever. Because this wasn't just another debate. It wasn't just another politician dodging the hard questions. This was Jasmine Crockett, a figure wrapped in controversy, arrogance, and whispers of corruption, and millions of viewers waiting to see if anyone could finally hold her feet to the fire. Lester had faced presidents before. He had interviewed war criminals. He had walked through hurricane wreckage to tell the country what happened when cameras usually turned away. But tonight, for reasons even he couldn't fully name, felt different. Maybe it was the stakes, the election year tension, the growing sense that people were losing faith in the system itself. Maybe it was the way Crockett smiled like she had already won, as though nothing and no one could touch her. Whatever it was, Lester could feel it in his chest as he stepped to the microphone. The weight of expectation, the promise he had carried his entire career that the truth mattered, that the people watching at home deserved better than half answers and political theater. And tonight, that quiet strength would be tested like never before. It began slowly, almost too slowly. Lester Holt didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam the table or cut Crockett off mid-sentence. He just waited, patient, silent, the way a surgeon waits before making the first incision. The crowd was restless after her latest dodge, the usual rehearsed speech about real issues and political distractions. She was smirking again, leaning back like this was nothing more than another night on camera. But Holt had been doing this for decades. He knew the difference between noise and truth. "Congresswoman," he said evenly, "you've told the American people tonight that the stories about lobbyist influence, the campaign funds unaccounted for, the missing reports are all distractions. Is that correct?" Crockett tilted her head, that smirk still there. "Yes, Lester, because that's exactly what they are. Distractions." Holt nodded slowly, almost kindly. "Then perhaps," he said, reaching for the first sheet of paper on his podium, "you can help me understand this." The camera zoomed in as he held it up. "On March 12th, Holt read, you told voters there was no connection between your office and Horizon Energy. But we have invoices, released by Horizon themselves, showing a series of meetings between your senior staff and Horizon lobbyists in the weeks leading up to that bill you pushed through committee. Were those invoices fabricated?" The smirk flickered. Crockett opened her mouth, but Holt didn't give her time to regroup. "Because," he continued, turning to the second page, "this email, dated March 3rd, shows your deputy chief of staff thanking Horizon for what he called, quote, their generous commitment to ensuring this legislation crosses the finish line." Again, your office's words, not mine. Gasps rippled through the audience. Phones lit up as viewers at home started clipping the moment for Twitter. Crockett tried to speak, something about context and half-truths, but Holt kept going. Calm, steady, each document, like another stone added to the pile. "April 7th, he said, voice still measured. You told a reporter you had never personally spoken with Horizon representatives. But here," he held up another page, "is the visitor log from the Capitol, showing a private meeting between you and Horizon's chief lobbyist on March 22nd. It's signed by your office." The audience erupted, some gasping, others cheering. Even the moderators at the edge of the stage looked stunned. Crockett raised her voice now, trying to cut through the noise. "Lester, if you'd let me explain—" "Oh, I'll let you explain," Holt said evenly, "right after this one." The screen behind them lit up with a giant projection, a quote from Crockett herself, taken from a podcast interview 2 years earlier. "I believe transparency," the quote read, "is the foundation of public trust." Holt turned back to her. "Those were your words, Congresswoman. Transparency is the foundation of public trust. So when voters ask why donations disappeared from records, why meetings with lobbyists weren't disclosed, why public statements don't match private actions, how do you reconcile that with the transparency you promised them?" The smirk was gone now. Crockett stammered something about political hit jobs, but it was weak, defensive, the kind of line that works when no one has receipts. Holt had the receipts, and he wasn't done. "Because," he said, voice lowering, just slightly, "this isn't about me, Congresswoman. It's not about ratings or headlines. It's about the people watching at home who believed you when you said you worked for them, who trusted you." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "And tonight," he said slowly, deliberately, "they deserve the truth." The audience was on its feet now. Applause, shouts, the kind of raw energy that happens when the air changes in a room. On Twitter, hashtags were already trending. Ears receipts, don't lie. Ears Crockett exposed. Memes were flying before the debate even ended. Crockett tried one last pivot, voice trembling slightly now, insisting this was all political theater, that voters cared about real issues, not paperwork. And that's when Holt delivered. The line that would play on every highlight reel for weeks, the line that ended the debate before it even officially ended. He looked right at her, calm as ever, and said, "Congresswoman, integrity is a real issue." The room exploded. Applause, cheers, even some boos from her loyalists. It didn't matter. The narrative was no longer hers. It belonged to the crowd, to the viewers, to the millions already sharing the moment online. And just like that, the narrative flipped. On its head. The moment Lester Holt delivered that final line, the debate was technically still underway. Questions remained on the list. Moderators shuffled papers as if the evening could somehow return to normal. But it couldn't. Not after what had just happened. Because while the cameras in the debate hall captured Crockett's tight jaw and Holt's calm, unshaken expression, another screen, the one in every living room, every phone, every laptop, had It already moved on to the real show, the Internet. Within minutes, Twitter exploded. Holt destroys. Crockett rocketed to the top of the trending list, not just in the United States but worldwide. People clipped the moment he held up the emails. The visitor logs. The quote about transparency. They shared them in real time with captions like, "This is how you hold power accountable," and "Lester Holt just gave a masterclass on journalism." On TikTok, reaction videos popped up by the thousands. Teenagers filmed themselves, screaming at their TVs when Holt said, "Integrity is a real issue." One clip showed a college dorm erupting into cheers like it was the Super Bowl. Another featured a grandmother wiping tears from her eyes, whispering, "Finally, someone said it." Late-night comedy hosts didn't wait for the next day's taping. They were tweeting jokes before the debate even ended. Jasmine Crockett claimed she cares about real issues, one comedian wrote, and Lester Holt said, "Cool, here are 17 of them, all with receipts." By the next morning, monologues across every network were locked and loaded. One host opened his show with a slow-motion replay of Holt's one-liner, the audience laughing and cheering as if he'd just landed a punch in a heavyweight fight. Another played a montage of Crockett dodging past interviews, cutting each clip, right before Holt dropped the corresponding evidence, like a prosecutor dismantling a defense lawyer's best speech. And it wasn't just comedians. Politicians weighed in, too. One senator tweeted, "Lester Holt reminded America tonight that the truth still matters." Another posted a simple GIF of a microphone dropping to the floor. Celebrities chimed in. Actors, musicians, athletes, they all had something to say. A famous rapper with 50 million followers tweeted, "Integrity is a real issue. Respect to Holt." A Hollywood actress posted on Instagram, "We need more journalists like this. Unshaken, unafraid." Even influencers who normally stuck to makeup tutorials or prank videos found ways to join the moment, filming skits about Crockett's disappearing confidence or lip-syncing Holt's line with dramatic music swelling in the background. The country couldn't stop talking about what they had just witnessed. Cable news replayed the exchange on a loop, analysts breaking it down frame by frame like it was the Zapruder film. Was this the moment Crockett's campaign began to crumble? Would voters remember her stammering responses or Holt's unshakable calm when they entered the voting booth? One panelist put it bluntly, "We've seen politicians dodge questions before, but rarely do we see someone dismantle the dodge in real time." Holt didn't just ask questions, he brought evidence, quotes, receipts. He was ready for every pivot, every smirk. Crockett wasn't debating a moderator tonight. She was debating the truth, and the truth won. By the following afternoon, the hashtags had multiplied. Arc receipts don't lie. Crockett exposed. Journalism matters. Memes flooded every corner of the Internet. Holt holding up documents with captions like, "Here's the lie you told, and here's the timestamp." Petitions even surfaced online calling for Holt to moderate the next presidential debate, racking up tens of thousands of signatures in hours. One viral tweet read, "Give Lester Holt every debate, every hearing, every congressional inquiry. The man runs on facts like it's oxygen." Meanwhile, Crockett's team tried damage control. Press releases talked about misunderstandings and political motivations. Spokespeople went on cable news to insist this was all a distraction from the real issues facing Americans. But it was too late. The narrative had escaped their control, because the country didn't just see a politician under fire, they saw a journalist refusing to let the moment slip away. And as the clips replayed, as the hashtags trended, as the talk shows and TikToks and Twitter threads piled on, one truth became clear. No one would forget the night Lester Holt took the gloves off. When the applause finally began to fade, when the cameras stopped cutting to Crockett's stunned expression, Lester Holt adjusted his notes and looked directly into the lens. His voice, steady and unhurried, carried the weight of someone who had seen too much of the world to be shaken by one night of chaos. "This," he said softly, almost like he was speaking to the millions at home, rather than the people in the room, was never about winning a debate. The audience grew still again. Even Crockett, shifting uncomfortably at her podium, seemed to realize the storm had passed her by and was now moving on without her. "This," Holt continued, "was about reminding America who we are. That truth still matters. That integrity still matters. That power without accountability is nothing more than theater, and the people deserve better than theater." His words didn't rise in volume. They didn't need to. It was the calmness, the certainty in his tone that made every syllable land like a hammer. He spoke of his father, who had worked 2 jobs so his kids could believe in a country where honesty counted for something. He spoke of teachers, nurses, small business owners, the people watching at home who didn't have lobbyists or PR teams or a stage to defend themselves, but who lived by the simple rule that the truth was the truth, no matter how inconvenient. "This is bigger than politics," Holt said, his gaze never wavering. "It's about trust. Without it, democracy doesn't work. Without it, nothing works." The room was silent now, the kind of silence that carries respect, not fear. Crockett's shoulders slumped slightly, the smirk long gone. Whatever fight she'd brought into the debate hall had dissolved under the weight of Holt's words, because this wasn't just a takedown anymore, it was a reckoning. Holt gathered his papers with the same calmness he had shown all night. No fist pumps, no victory laps, just quiet dignity, the kind that leaves no doubt about who owned the moment. And as he stepped away from the microphone, one truth was undeniable. The journalist had spoken, the facts had landed, and the country had heard him. The hero walked away calm. The villain faded into silence, and that's why they're calling it the night Holt destroyed Crockett. It wasn't just a debate. It wasn't just another headline swallowed by the 24-hour news cycle. It was the moment a journalist reminded a nation that facts still have power, that calm courage can outshine arrogance, that the truth, when delivered with precision and dignity, can cut through even the thickest political smog. Clips of the exchange will keep trending. Politicians will keep spinning. Crockett's team will keep scrambling to rewrite the story. But deep down, everyone watching knows what they saw. A reckoning, broadcast live, impossible to spin away. And if you believe that truth still matters, if you believe accountability still matters, then share this moment. Make sure it's seen in every classroom, every newsroom, every corner of the internet where cynicism has started to replace hope. Because what happened tonight wasn't just about one politician or one journalist. It was about all of us, about whether we still demand honesty from those who lead, whether we still expect courage from those who speak for the people. So, subscribe. Stay with us for the full story, because the fight for truth isn't over, it's only just begun. And as the cameras dim, as the stage empties, one final line echoes louder than anything said tonight, because silence is no longer an option.